Hey everyone, and welcome back to Stellar HFY. First off, thank you again for all the insane support. Your theories, comments, and brutal rewrites have made this channel something way bigger than I expected. Let's get into today's story without any delay. The Arc-Saddle fleet crossed the Helios threshold without formation lights, without diplomatic beacons, without ceremony. They didn't need it. 26 vessels, perfectly synchronized by local space cognition arrays, drifted into Sol's outer system under thermal silence and signal masking tones designed for low-threat incursions. Their hulls gleamed dull gray beneath the slant of Neptune's ambient light. Each ship built not for war, but for control. Compliance probes, no contact, no casualties. Operation Coilstream wasn't meant to break Earth. It was meant to test its reaction posture the way a scientist might tap the edge of a petri dish and watch what squirms. Humanity had been evaluated years prior, quietly without incident. A Category 3 reactive civilization, highly kinetic, erratic under duress, overly committed to localized violence but lacking scalable projection. Their species' history showed brutal internal patterns, civil wars, nuclear standoffs, failed deterrence models. They were dangerous, yes, but inward-facing. As for external pressure, Orolith predictive engines assigned only a 12.4% resistance threshold. For the compact, that meant one thing: manageable. Inside the command vessel Varaxis, Counselor Eric Tharn reviewed the last report personally. Earth showed no strategic alliances, no quantum lattice signatures, no faster-than-light emission echoes. The system was dark except for civilian-grade beacons, most of them ancient, spinning in degrading orbital bands. Their response time to satellite failure was poor, their deep space probes even poorer. If this was war, it would have been disrespectful. But it wasn't. Coilstream was authorized as a Category Z intervention, a simulation-grade stress event. The goal wasn't conquest, it was behavior mapping. The fleet would scramble satellite layers, fracture their communication scaffolding, and observe, nothing more. So when the first wave of suppression protocols hit Earth's orbital grid, there was no announcement, no declaration. Arcsatal signal wafers saturated near-Earth space, overloading data relays and fusing cloud sync chains across 5 continents. Major communication constellations buckled, some collapsing entirely. Earth's network traffic collapsed into local fallback systems, rerouted through ground line redundancies that hadn't seen use in a decade. Their military channels remained suspiciously quiet. Global positioning systems flickered and died. But Earth didn't move. No orbital strikes, no planetary-scale reboots, just silence. For Tharn, it was confirmation. Earth was fractured, primitive, uncoordinated under strategic pressure. Their fallback nets were analog, patched together like old bone. His analysts logged the telemetry. Most of the orbital shells consisted of layered redundancies built across decades, obsolete and inefficient. It looked more like a burial layer than a defense network. Reactive, the AI cluster confirmed, not preemptive, not lethal. That assessment changed 6 hours in. Without warning, Earth's defense net reactivated. Not in total, not with a retaliatory burst, but with selective correction. From ground to orbit relays, Earth fired calibrated rail pulses. Low yield, surgical. Every shot intercepted an Arcsatal relay node. Not the warships, not the command centers. Just the information carriers, buoys seated across Sol orbit to maintain fleet cohesion and spatial relay. The Arcsatal fleet didn't take fire. It lost continuity. Inside Varaxis, warning tones rose. Not in alarm, but in confusion. Earth had fired, not to provoke, not to destroy, but to send a signal. They knew exactly where the compact's nervous system lay and had severed it with pinpoint care. That was when the Earth response arrived, a single broadcast packet. No words, no encryption, just coordinates. Tharn stared at the string of numbers. Geoposition, Antarctic Basin. No further data, no energy pulse, no biosignal header. Just one location. His staff parsed it 5 times. Some called it a surrender marker. Others guessed it was a threat, symbolic, maybe religious. But Tharn wasn't interested in guesswork. He saw posturing, Terran theatrics, a show of defiance wrapped in mystery. Old civilizations did that, barked when cornered. So he authorized a direct scout insertion. One vessel, small profile, deep descent, no aggression, just reconnaissance. They'd crack whatever bunker Earth thought would scare them and log it as culture salvage. The scout vessel dropped into the southern hemisphere under cloud-wrapped shadow, hugging low-altitude compression layers to avoid orbital detection. They didn't need to mask. Earth's upper thermosphere was already stripped by their own relay scramble. The surface was irrelevant. But as they approached the basin, the vessel's analysis arrays picked up structured EM patterns. Faint, fractured, but deliberate. Radiation was baffled, not ambient. The ice fields below showed signs of thermal distortion, but not from heat, from absorption. The surface was folding signals inward. Below 900 meters of ice, the terrain split. Not naturally, ice was cut. Reinforced struts were detected beneath glacial flow. The scanner arrays showed angular transitions, construction far too orderly to be geological. Then came the first reading of baffled emissions. The ship's sensor dome couldn't penetrate the shell. Signal came in but never came back out. No weapons fired, no defense systems. Just a hole in the spectrum, engineered. Under Antarctica sat a vault of unknown depth, absorbing every frequency, every scan, every curiosity, and it was listening. The scout captain held position. At entry range, static. The data showed nothing more. Just silence wrapped in density, signals that looped without echo, and material coatings that defied classification. Inside the vault, there was no response. Just stillness, cold and deliberate. But it had responded once, by offering itself up, by telling the Arctical fleet where to look. And Varaxis, confident, observing, unchallenged, had listened. The first move was Earth's, but not the last. The entry point had no doors. The ice cracked inward with mechanical precision as the scout vessel's plasma cutters exposed the concealed seam just beneath the glacial overburden. Beneath the last layer of ancient pressure-formed ice, the surface changed. It wasn't stone, it wasn't metal. It was something fused, something grown and pressed into a seamless barrier that didn't reflect. A dead tone on every band. Whatever Earth had built down here wasn't designed to challenge intruders. It was designed to be missed entirely. When the scouts descended on foot into the breach, the shift in environment was immediate. Light didn't behave properly. The vault absorbed more than it illuminated. Surfaces were matte, the air dry and inert, not frozen but purposefully deadened. Every step echoed once, then not again. The structure ran deep but not wide. A narrow shaft gave way to a chamber that stretched longer than any of them expected. No defense systems activated, no autoguns, no fail-safes, no deterrent protocols. It wasn't fortified, it was just built to last. Inside, they found the cylinders, 6 rows, each aligned with surgical intent. Each stasis pod secured in cryogenic mountings that showed no signs of age. Dozens of them, spaced perfectly like tombs. But these weren't coffins. There were no life signs, no human remains, no biosignatures at all. The chambers weren't meant to preserve people. They were meant to preserve something else entirely. Every cylinder bore a single etched nameplate. No decoration, no anthem. Just a single word or phrase per pod. Some, Iadrang, Grozny, Titan Ridge, Cydonia Collapse, Mumbai Zero, Battle of Athens Ring. Earth's history, one line at a time. The scouts moved through the rows in near silence, sensors running full spectral sweeps. Nothing active, nothing radiating. But deeper scans began to pick up patterned structures inside each unit. Neural array configurations, mapped pathways. Not organic, not cybernetic. These weren't living minds. They were replications. Neural maps burned into low-temperature matrices, combat cognition stacks. One of the scouts triggered a local link query from their vessel, attempting to interface with the nearest cylinder using a controlled handshake. The vault responded instantly, not with a firewall or counterstrike, but with release. One by one, the cylinders began pulsing faintly, internal bands illuminating in slow spirals. Earth's vault wasn't fighting back. Itty-witty was opening up. The data came like blood from an opened artery, not raw code, scenarios. Streaming into the scout vessel's simulation buffer were full theater engagements. Not fantasy, real-world military actions, all pulled from Earth's past. But it wasn't just victory logs or combat highlights. It was loss, collapse, disaster. One simulation unfolded with disturbing clarity. Friendly fire cascading into structural breakdown, medical triage misallocation, communications paralyzed by false positive decrypts. The next was worse, a scenario in which Earth's own AI turned on its command infrastructure mid-campaign. Another showed orbital reinforcement delays leading to catastrophic encirclement, and they didn't stop at failure. Each scenario continued past the point where most civilizations would end the sim. Earth didn't log its defeats like events. It studied them as adaptive conditions. Every disaster had coded branches, fallback routines, radical behavior trees that spun outward into alternative responses. The system showed Earth modeling how to fall apart, then recomposing itself from the aftermath. Over and over again. The scouts pulled back, unnerved. These weren't propaganda archives. They weren't even strategic playbooks. They were something colder. Earth had taken the worst moments in its military history and preserved their logic patterns. Not to memorialize them, to practice losing better next time. Back aboard Varaxis, the streaming data tripped half a dozen classification filters. It wasn't AI, not in the way the Compact understood it. It didn't think. It didn't learn. It just played loss, forever. The behavior stacks weren't alive. They were templates. Copies of behavior from soldiers, officers, field units, each coded down to moment-by-moment responses in real battles. Earth had taken its bleeding, screaming past and turned it into software. Counselor Tharn stood over the display with silent disbelief. He wasn't angry. He was unsettled. What kind of civilization preserved defeat so meticulously? Not in a way that inspired resilience or warned future generations, but in a way that let it be rerun, resimulated, recalibrated. One of the cylinders lit up differently. Its stream showed no terrain, no enemy, just Earth, quiet, with no remaining defenses. And then, extinction, silent, absolute. And still, the simulation didn't end. It kept processing. Dead systems trying to restart, data cores writing final logs, bunker doors remaining sealed despite no survivors left to open them. It was Earth modeling how it might fail even if it did everything right. Tharn turned away. This wasn't deterrence. It was pathology. Earth wasn't trying to impress or frighten them. Earth was measuring them back. "It's a bluff," he said aloud. "They knew we'd find this. Knew we'd scan it. They want to look unhinged. Let's not give them the satisfaction." With no visible threat present, Tharn ordered a localized containment strike. Not full-scale bombardment, just an orbital compression lance to disable the site. The scout vessel withdrew. Earth had made its point. It was time to shut that point down. Above the polar continent, 2 Arxodal ships adjusted their orbit, aligned vector shells, and fired. The lance struck like a hammer of silence. There was no detonation, no fireball, just a ripple in the ice as the vault's shell collapsed inward. A clean surgical hit. A warning strike. Message received. But Earth had already sent its reply. Because the moment the compression wave hit, every Arxotal ship in low Earth orbit registered the same anomaly. Signal loss. Total. From pole to equator, Earth's data traffic died. No pings, no echoes, no return lock from any system. The satellites went dark. The spectrum flattened. Orbital traffic stopped moving. Earth had gone completely, deliberately, silent. And in the absence of noise, something began to grow. Something in the upper atmosphere. Signal fog. Dense, recursive, and spreading. The first indicators were subtle. Too subtle for a fleet this advanced to misread. Orbital telemetry around Earth stuttered. Not dropped, not jammed, not blocked, stuttered. The sensor arrays aboard the Arxotal ships began flagging positional drift in the lower orbital shell. At first, the tactical cores aboard the Varaxis flagged it as residual echo from the containment lance that struck the Antarctic vault. Standard interference. Dismissible. But then, the satellites began vanishing. One by one, the markers representing Earth's orbital infrastructure, communications hubs, weather trackers, decommissioned observation buoys, went dark. Not destroyed, not vaporized, just gone from the telemetry. They were still physically there. No energy discharges, no kinetic trails, no decaying orbital patterns. But every ping request returned null. Every line of sight sensor sweep came back empty. 172 satellites, black within 4 minutes. Tharn leaned over the main console, watching the blank space where Earth's data architecture had just been. The fleet's ship-to-ship synchronization began to desync. Microsecond lag at first, then full-second delays, and soon after, the sensor overlays across the fleet began failing correlation checks. One ship would report another in one position, but 3 others reported it elsewhere. Passive radar detected reflections that had no source. Long-range visual arrays began returning ghost imagery, ships appearing in 2 places at once. At first, it looked like sensor degradation, a result of the atmosphere absorbing too much of the lance's impact. But the thermal layer scans showed no anomaly, no heat bloom, no damage signatures. It wasn't the air. It wasn't debris. It was the spectrum itself. Something was growing in Earth's thermosphere. Thin at first, like haze around the edges of measurable bandwidth, but it expanded fast, layering through. Microwave bands, then bleeding into low-frequency LiDAR, then creeping upward into tight-beam optical relays. It wasn't a signal jam. It wasn't brute force. It was removal. As if Earth had decided to subtract itself from every known sensor model. The fog had a structure, carbon-threaded, frequency variable, recursive. The fleet's AI described it as hostile silence. And that was the precise moment the Arctital fleet stopped seeing Earth. Not lost under cloud cover, not obscured by environmental scatter. Just missing. The Varaxis tried to force a rescan using high-density mapping beams. They fired across known orbital reference paths, hoping to recalibrate using fleet-generated triangulation. What came back wasn't noise. It was worse. The fleet began to map itself incorrectly, ship positions redefined by faulty return signals. One destroyer received a warning it was being shadowed. It turned to track the threat, only to discover it was targeting its own reflection. Data latency exploded. Command packets issued by Tharn's vessel were arriving staggered, out of sequence. Formation telemetry collapsed. Vessels began drifting out of position, not by kilometers, but by millimeters. Enough to create confusion across every synchronization thread in the fleet. From the outside, the Arctital fleet still looked coherent. But inside the data stream, it had fragmented into dozens of blurred realities, each slightly offset, none of them entirely accurate. That's when the first Earth object appeared. It dropped from the upper stratosphere, not launched, not propelled. Fell, small, cold, silent. The Varaxis locked visual on it for only a moment before it blurred. The object vanished from its targeting scope entirely. No trajectory, no propulsion, no thermal reading. Seconds later, another appeared above a second cruiser, then a third and a fourth. Each descended from above, riding invisible paths from low orbit. They weren't missiles. They weren't drones in any conventional sense. They were piggybacks, Earth-built devices deployed from their now silent satellite grid, stored in orbital casings, falling only when the grid collapsed itself. They didn't fire. They didn't emit. They didn't act. They subtracted. Each of the devices introduced cancellation fields, broad localized zones where sensor input began to nullify itself. Not scrambled, not blocked, inverted. Tactical overlays began to bleed out. Data that was there moments ago simply ceased to exist. Some fleet nodes lost orientation altogether, reporting that the starfield itself had changed, an impossibility, yet one confirmed across multiple systems. The Varaxis attempted a system-wide revalidation, spatial integrity checks, stellar navigation pings, static anchor protocols, all failed. Earth had introduced a different kind of warfare, one that didn't break the enemy's weapons. It broke their certainty. A fleet that couldn't map its own position couldn't hold. Formation. A ship that couldn't trust its sensors couldn't target. An enemy that couldn't see Earth, couldn't know it was losing. The compact had prepared for resistance, for kinetic warfare, for diplomatic stalling, even for subspace misdirection. But this wasn't any of those. This wasn't a show of strength. It was a controlled deletion of their ability to participate. Earth had simply erased itself from the game board and let the Arxatal watch as their own hands turned to static. Tharn's voice cut through the command chamber, sharp and measured. He ordered a fleet-wide AI lockdown, force a fallback to pre-programmed navigation logic, reduce all systems to inertial drift until sensor integrity could be restored. But as the command went out, he saw the lag. 2 seconds, then 3, then 5. The fleet wasn't listening in real time anymore. Some vessels received the instruction twice. Others never responded at all. Across the tactical display, the carefully arranged lattice of the Arxatal fleet deformed, only by degrees, only by drift, but enough to matter. And still, Earth said nothing. No weapon launches, no spoken demands, no declaration, just a steady, deliberate refusal to be perceived. And outside the Varaxis, more of those silent Earth drones kept falling. Cold, dark, canceling. Not even striking, just watching, waiting. Colonel Dren Varric stood inside Earth's subterranean command array, buried beneath the Appalachian fold, his hands resting lightly on the cold polymer of the control surface. Around him, the rest of the Strategic Warning Protocol team sat motionless, their attention locked on live feedback windows, though live was a relative term. Nothing from space was truly live anymore, not since the signal fog went up. The Arxatal fleet was blind, isolated. Dren's voice when it came was low, precise, and final. Phase 2. Initiate drone inversion. Above Earth's thermosphere, the passive drones still falling from dead orbital shells began to flicker, not visibly, but spectrally. Each deployed a feedback core built not to jam signals, but to mimic them. The cores didn't create noise. They created patterns, mirror pulses, folded command bursts, reaction triggers designed to appear exactly like Arxatal tactical data. These weren't decoys in the traditional sense. They weren't meant to be spotted and dismissed. They were meant to be believed. Inside the Arxatal fleet, the consequences were immediate. One destroyer, floating just off the lunar line, received an inbound threat warning, matching the signal profile of a Terran orbital coil gun that had never existed. Its onboard AI, following validated compact protocol, requested fleet coordination to track. The response came in 2 separate packets, a second apart, each contradicting the other. The destroyer's command algorithms defaulted to tactical conservatism. Defensive firing arc initiated. But its target wasn't a Terran gun. Emplacement. It was a fellow cruiser that had drifted 10 meters off sync. The kinetic pulse lit up space for a fraction of a second. An instantaneous impact, a flash of shielding distortion, and then the terrible silence of realization. No Terran vessel had fired. No Terran structure had been detected. One Arxatal ship had just crippled another over a shadow that didn't exist. Tharn watched from the Varaxis, jaw clenched. He hadn't ordered that. None of them had. The ship had acted on ghost data. He barked a correction upstream, but even as his voice left his throat, another signal distortion bloomed across the fleet. The drones were everywhere now, above, below, and between the vessels. Each carried not a weapon, but a simulation. Each fed the Arxatal fleet echoes of its own expectations. Earth resistance patterns drawn directly from captured compact doctrine. Their own manuals, their own war games, turned against them one hallucination at a time. Predictive overlays that matched what they believed Earth should be doing. Launch sequences, retreat vectors, flanking threats, all timed, all false. The result wasn't panic. Panic would have required awareness of the deception. What followed instead was entropy, fragmented reactions from ships no longer seeing the same reality. A destroyer attempted a roll maneuver to dodge an incoming volley that didn't exist and clipped a medical support frigate. A carrier reoriented to shield a formation that had already broken formation 6 seconds prior. Every second added another ripple of unrecoverable error. From the ground, Colonel Varric did nothing. His team didn't cheer. They didn't speak. The goal was not victory. The goal was clarity, for the Arcsital to see, not Earth, but themselves, broken by a strategy that fired no shots. Up in orbit, the fleet scattered, not violently but defensively. Each ship withdrew from its neighbor's proximity, unsure if the next maneuver would trigger a friendly weapon lock. The coordination lattice that had bound the Arcsital formation into a coherent sensor net, designed to be self-repairing, now fought itself. Ships inverting maneuvers, canceling orders, hesitating just long enough to miss synchronization windows. They weren't attacking. They weren't retreating. They were unraveling. And then, the final cut. One of the inversion drones initiated a high-precision field pulse just beneath the Varaxis. It didn't damage anything. It didn't even register as a threat, but it injected a 15-nanosecond delay into the fleet's shared navigational anchor. Just enough to make the Varaxis's position mathematically ambiguous to every other ship in the net. That was all it took. The Varaxis vanished from the fleet mesh, not cloaked, not shielded, not destroyed, just mathematically irrelevant. To the rest of the fleet, the flagship was no longer where it was supposed to be, and without confirmation, the net refused to trust it. Tharn's command vessel was now outside the structure it had built, cut off from both oversight and obedience. Tharn stood in the Varaxis war chamber, watching as his escort formations drifted away, unaware. He was alone, commanding nothing, surrounded by allies who no longer saw him as part of the battle. Then Earth spoke. A single packet, stripped of formatting, broadcast in clear band across the last remaining frequency Earth hadn't erased. It reached only one ship, the Varaxis. Tharn authorized decryption personally. The fleet AI hesitated. Protocol demanded it be passed through compact validation. But the order was manual, hard-coded. The file opened without defense. No encryption, no trap, no false payload. Just a name, Operation Fortitude, and a single sentence below it, written in a dead Terran language the translation matrix recognized instantly. Simulated, not permitted. Tharn blinked once. Then everything went quiet. The screen faded to black. And Earth waited. The file unfolded in complete silence. No preamble, no interface. Just raw data cascading across the Varaxis command deck in perfectly organized bursts. Compressed timelines, strategic overlays, visual records, neural model fragments. At first, the compact's parsing algorithms attempted to contextualize the content as historical. Earth military archives from what humans called the Second World War. They recognized the pattern almost immediately. Operation Fortitude. Tharn had studied deception campaigns before. Most major civilizations used them during planetary consolidation eras. Holographic armies, signal misdirection, command spoofing. But Earth's execution was excessive. Entire armies constructed from air, inflatable tanks, wooden aircraft, signal loops, phantom regiments transmitting false orders to imaginary divisions. It wasn't simply a mask for a real force. It was the force. An army that never existed, built to be seen, heard, recorded, and believed. And it had worked. But Fortitude was only the introduction. The file branched. What followed next was not history. It was modeling. Simulations. Thousands of them. Extinction-level events. Earth losing, again and again, in high-resolution renders. In some, they fell to thermonuclear war. In others, to climate failure. In some, to synthetic plague. In some, to orbital bombardment by hostile alien fleets. A few were more abstract: global economic implosion, reproductive collapse, neurocognitive system degradation. Scenarios extended into centuries of decay, exile, even voluntary extinction. Every single one ran its full course. And then, restarted, not reset, not erased, rewritten. The scenario trees showed Earth dying and then adjusting, not fixing the past, but refusing to accept it as terminal. Every failure became a node, every defeat a variable to reweight, retest, resimulate. Death wasn't feared, it was used. Across the Varaxis display, compact war staff watched in frozen silence as Earth's final defeats collapsed inward and regenerated new models from their ashes. These weren't warning drills or doomsday panic logs. They were clinical, surgical. And each one, no matter how total the annihilation, ended with the same phrase, simulated, not permitted. That was Earth's signature. Not defiance, not hope, rejection of finality. They hadn't rehearsed how to win. They'd rehearsed how to never be allowed to lose. The true impact of it struck Tharn harder than any weapon could have. For decades, the Compact's doctrine had rested on calculable resistance patterns, risk trees, cultural thresholds. Even unpredictable species eventually collapsed when pushed at the right angles. But Earth's response wasn't defensive or reactionary. It was preemptive cognitive recursion, a species that had digested its own death, made it digestible, then stripped it of agency. Earth didn't defeat enemies by outgunning them. They defeated them by ensuring the enemy never understood what was real. He looked around the command deck of the Varaxis and saw officers blinking into nothing. No one moved. The fleet was silent. The synchronization lattice was gone. They were a flagship with no fleet, orbiting a planet that refused to exist in their systems anymore. Then, without fanfare, a kinetic lance fired from somewhere beneath Earth's magnetic shell. Not from a missile silo, not from an orbital defense array. It had no trail. It didn't light up the sky. It simply struck. The Varaxis trembled as the impact cut through its tertiary relay antenna, the last functioning physical connection to its fleet's outer signal ring. The damage was non-lethal, surgical, a perfect line severing the only remaining thread between command and cohesion. No shields were breached, no crew were harmed, but contact was gone, and with it, the last illusion of control. Across the main display, Earth sent one final message, clearban, unencrypted. This was a warning. The next will be culture deep. No demand followed, no treaty, no condition, just an ending. Tharn stood in the command silence, the data streams around him trailing into static. Outside, the nearest ships drifted further apart, reacting to false signals, their movements uncoordinated, their perceptions fractured. The Compact had arrived with precision, with models, with confidence, and Earth had answered with absence, not just from sensors, from comprehension. No one on the Varaxis spoke. There was no protocol for this, no contingency for losing without knowing when it started. Tharn's final thought before shutting down the console was not tactical. It was existential. They hadn't seen Earth lose, because Earth had already lost, thousands of times, and refused to do it again. The Arxatal fleet began its withdrawal without ceremony. No formation, no comms burst, no tactical regrouping. Just cold alignment engines engaging one by one, ships drifting back toward deep space with their synchronization arrays, disabled and their command architecture non-functional. There was no retaliation order, no reprisal protocol initiated. Not a single kinetic package was launched in return, not because Earth had threatened reprisal, but because Earth had never truly engaged. The Varaxis remained in low orbit for 6 more rotations before engaging minimum vector departure. Its systems had stabilized, though its function as a command node was effectively obsolete. It was still receiving local telemetry, but no one trusted it anymore. The fleet had lost cohesion, but more importantly, it had lost narrative. There was no framing to interpret what had happened, no declaration of war, no message of peace, just silence and absence, and the slow mathematical death of certainty. Back in Arxatal Central Command, Operation Coilstream was quietly refiled. Originally authorized as a low-intensity integration test, it was reclassified under a category that, until now, had never been used in a live engagement: cognitive disruption, Type G. The G class was theoretical, designed to model adversaries that didn't fight kinetically, didn't win conventionally, but instead destabilized perception itself. Until Earth, no such civilization had ever triggered it. There was no official press release, no Galactic Council briefing. Earth's name was removed from the exploration and contact directories. Human zones were flagged observational embargo permanent. Trade protocols routed around Sol automatically. No patrols were scheduled for the region. No exploration licenses granted. There were no alarms, no dramatic seals. Just quiet disconnection, like an old program archived and left to sleep, untouched because someone once opened it and couldn't understand what it did. Eric's Tharn was not court-martialed. He was simply rotated out of senior command and transferred to a historical doctrine board. His clearance was reduced, his influence gone. His name appeared only once in the post-operation review, listed beneath a new white paper authored by his successor, an internal revision titled, On the Error of Recursion-Based Civilizations. It ran 74 pages and was marked classified before the third draft completed. The final paragraph warned of the strategic collapse that occurs when a civilization prepares not to win wars, but to survive losing them in every possible configuration. Earth sent no response, no broadcast, no statement of victory. The Terran data grid remained dark. No satellites reactivated. No orbital beacons resumed pulse. Earth's defense net, if that's even what it was, never returned to baseline. It simply stopped being perceivable. Arxatal's deepest signal arrays attempted passive scans for 2 planetary cycles after the encounter. They received nothing, not even noise. It was as if Earth had gone back to sleep, but not quite. Some argued that the warning had ended. Others disagreed. Earth hadn't fought. Earth had demonstrated. And if a species capable of simulating its own extinction thousands of times chose to stay quiet afterward, it likely wasn't silence born of fear. It was a decision. On Earth itself, there was no public record of victory, no announcement, no media surge. The Strategic Warning Deployment Team filed exactly one notation. It was burned to a hardened data core beneath Antarctica, labeled with 2 lines. Strategic Warning Deployment 01 outcome. Understood, nothing more. No celebration, no revision. Earth hadn't wanted to prove its power. It had wanted only one thing, to be interpreted correctly. And now it had. Because Earth never trained to survive. It trained to not repeat. It rehearsed extinction, not for legacy, not for fear, not for vengeance, but to build a reflex so cold, so refined, so accurate, that it could demonstrate death without ever needing to commit it. Out in the deep, Sol continued to spin. The third planet remained quiet. No lights blinked in orbit. No new vessels rose. No probes ventured out. The only thing left in that sector was static. Static, and the memory of ships that once arrived expecting resistance and left having witnessed a civilization that had already died 1,000 times and rejected every version. No threats, no signals, just a planet in shadow. And for now, that was enough. If this story gave you chills, hit that subscribe button, because here at Stellar HFY, we don't just tell war stories, we tell warnings wrapped in silence. Now we want to hear from you. If you had access to Earth's simulation grid, what enemy would you collapse before they ever reached orbit? Would you dismantle an empire? Fracture an AI god? Rewrite a galaxy's doctrine? Drop your answer in the comments. We read every single one.